Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Tom Bookert, Senior Instructor, and this is our Warrior Personal Strength lesson on Indomitable Spirit for this week. And today's lesson is about Fred's Freedom Year. At the beginning of 1836, Fred promised himself that this would be his freedom year. This was the year he would claim his liberty. Fred was still in Talbot County doing farm work, though he didn't work for Covey anymore. But he couldn't just run away to Baltimore. Even if he got that far, he would still be a slave there, too. But Fred had found out there were places in the United States that had abolished slavery. If he could get to one of those places, he could claim his liberty and stop being a slave. Fred had heard about one of these places, Philadelphia. He decided that was where he would go, with 5 of his friends who were also slaves: John and Henry Harris, Sandy Jenkins, Charles Roberts, and Henry Bailey. He planned to escape. They would take a log canoe and sail north up the Chesapeake until they reached the Susquehanna River. Then they would abandon the canoe and walk the rest of the way overland. Fred wasn't sure just how far away Philadelphia was. He didn't have a reliable map. But he reasoned that if they kept moving north, they would find it eventually. Fred and his friends planned their escape as carefully as they could. They did their best to keep it secret. They met far out in the woods to make their plan. As they talked and planned together, they thought about what might happen to them. All kinds of frightening things could go wrong with their escape. Fred and his friends were often apprehensive as they discussed the dangers involved. Sailing up the Chesapeake, they might be caught by a storm far out in the bay. Their canoe would capsize or sink, and they would all be drowned. Once they got on land, they might get lost, run out of food, and starve to death. They might be chased by bounty hunters with guns and packs of vicious hunting dogs. And if they were caught, they would be severely punished. They might even be sold south to spend the rest of their lives working in the cotton fields hundreds of miles from home. As they imagined all the bad things that could happen to them, they grew more and more apprehensive, even frightened. Maybe they would be better off playing it safe and giving up on the whole idea of escaping. Fred did his best to encourage his friends, even though he was every bit as scared as the rest of them. Out in the woods, when their confidence would ebb and their doubts and their fears gnawed at them, it was Fred who would tell them that claiming their liberty was worth all the risk and all the danger. He spoke just as much to encourage himself, to nerve himself to face his fears and uncertainties, as he did to encourage his friends. One of them wouldn't be encouraged. Sandy Jenkins decided that it was all just too risky, and he told Fred he didn't want to be part of the escape attempt anymore. He warned Fred that it would all come to a bad end for everyone involved, and especially for Fred. Fred heard Sandy out and wished him well. But even though it was risky, Fred and the rest of his friends were determined to stick with their plan. They were resolved to escape. They had planned as well and as carefully as they could, and now it was time to put their plan into action. They agreed on the day and time to start. Saturday, April 2nd, the day before Easter. They would wait until dusk and then sail away in the growing darkness up the Chesapeake Bay. It would be Monday at the earliest before anyone noticed they were missing. That would give them a good head start on any pursuit. With a little luck and a fair wind up the bay, they might get clean away before anyone knew that they were gone. That was the plan. What actually happened was that Saturday morning, as they worked spreading manure in the fields, Fred and his friends were seized by a posse of county constables. Somehow, their plan to escape had been betrayed. Each of them had their wrists tightly tied in front of them. Then they were led away on long ropes, walking behind the constables on horseback. They were led this way to the county jail in Easton, 11 miles away. Fred had promised himself that this would be his freedom year. But now, instead of taking his first step toward claiming his liberty, April 2nd had become the worst day of Fred's life. It was far worse than being bullied and beaten by Covey. He was in jail. His hopes and his plans for escape were shattered. He and his friends had been betrayed. Was it Sandy who had betrayed them? That was a question that bothered Fred the rest of his life. He never did find out the answer. Fred and his friends were held in jail for a week. Their only company were the slave traders who would come in to look them over. Then they would laugh and joke together, talking about how much money they would make when Fred and his friends were sold south. At the end of the week, Fred's friends were claimed by their owners and taken back to their farms. Fred didn't see or hear anything of Thomas Auld, his owner. With his friends gone, he was all on his own in the jail, except for the slave traders. They were even more interested in him now. Maybe they couldn't have his friends, but they were sure that they would have Fred. Alone in the jail, Fred could only wait for what would come. He was certain that he would be sold south. Now we've got some questions to go with today's lesson, today's story. The first one, as they discussed their escape plan, Fred and his friends became scared of all the dangers involved. Fred was just as scared as the rest of his friends, yet he encouraged them to move ahead with their plan. He was also nerving himself to face his fears and uncertainties. Do you think this was because he lacked indomitable spirit? Or was he working to awaken and apply this personal strength to overcome his fears? Next question. Sandy Jenkins decided the escape attempt was too risky. and dropped out? Do you think he didn't care about claiming his liberty, or was he too afraid of the dangers of escaping? Was he applying indomitable spirit as his personal strength? Next question. After Sandy backed out, Fred and the rest of his friends resolved to stick with their plan to escape. They knew it was dangerous. They knew many things could go wrong, and they were scared. Yet they were willing to accept the risks and face the dangers. Do you think this took indomitable spirit? Finally, Fred promised himself that 1836 was going to be his freedom year. April 2nd would be his first step to claiming his liberty. Instead, he was in jail, surrounded by slave traders planning to sell him south. Do you think he will give up all hope? Or will he face this personal disaster with indomitable spirit? Well, for that one, we'll find out next time. Thank you for joining me for today's lesson. And I look forward to getting back together next time, and we'll find out what does happen